going to be jointly presented by Joe Goldberg and myself. He's the brains behind the operation, and I'm the pretty face. But essentially, cloud economics is considered by some to be some of the most confusing math ever created. I don't know if I'd say it's the most confusing math, but it's up there. Okay. Uh, the topics we're going to be covering is we're going to go through a very quick intro and refresher on the basics of cloud. Then we're going to go into pricing principles, total cost of ownership, and optimization of cloud features and optimization of cloud costs. Just a quick intro, and we're going to breeze through this. We don't want to spend a lot of time on it. We did do an earlier presentation on this, and if anybody does not have those slides and want them, we'll be happy to send them out. Just let me know. But essentially, cloud computing, the formal definitions of it, it's on-demand self-service. You can set up your cloud to spin up or spin down. It allows pooled resources. You can use more or less as you need it. The service is measured, and you've got broad access through your network. And when it comes down to who's not using cloud today, I'm going to let this slide speak for itself. Okay. And in terms of cloud usage, the types of clouds that you use, this is a Gartner report, and people are using private cloud, public cloud, and hybrid. We think that the future is going to be going more and more towards hybrid. And what's not shown here is another type of cloud computing, which is edge computing, which is essentially setting up a cloud near the point of data origination so that you can get it quicker and you can analyze it quicker. And this is especially relevant to manufacturing and industrial plants, utilities, and so forth. Okay. In terms of market share, you've got some leading providers that most of us have heard of. Amazon AWS is leading the pack by far, but Azure is not far behind. And the others are listed here. I'm not going to read every detail here. Anybody who's attending has access to these slides afterwards, so we're just going to kind of breeze through them. Okay, we talked about three types of services: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Essentially, this kind of goes through all three of those. And basically, what's green is what the cloud user manages, and what's in blue is what the cloud provider manages. And you can see that, when you get to software as a service, that's where most of the heavy lifting is done by the cloud provider. In the case of on-premises cloud, which is a private cloud, you're doing it all yourself. Okay, there's some benefits. The benefit is that the initial investment is low cost. You get a lot of economy of scale. It is flexible. When you need more service or less, you can scale up or down. You can set it up rapidly, and it's reliable. 99.9% for AWS. And in terms of durability, data persistence, it's a lot more than that. Okay. Drawbacks. Once you've scaled up to where you're using it, it can turn out to be very expensive. And we'll drill into that in a little bit more detail. But at some point, there's a trade-off between costs and, depending on how much you use, an on-premise solution may be cheaper at some point. Another drawback is that when you're locked into a vendor, it's hard to get out. Because you're so invested in that technology, and to move somewhere else is a major effort. And if you have an improper configuration, it can be a disaster for you and your business. And essentially, you're kind of giving up control. In terms of basic pricing principles, I'm going to turn that over to my partner in crime, Joe Goldberg.
All right, I just requested control from you, Charlie.
So I will stop presenting. There you go.
Or you could do that. Okay, so hold on one sec.
Would you like me to go back to it and see if I can give you control?
Hang on. Yeah, I think you're gonna have to do that because I forgot to give Teams permission to share my screen.
Okay, well, there we go.
The disadvantage of using a Mac.
Okay, give control to Joe Goldberg.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, great.
All right, so we'll talk about some of the basic pricing principles. Now, I concentrated on AWS here because you kind of have to pick one, I guess, to speak about. But Azure and Google work almost identically. The actual costs might be a little bit different, but the philosophy about how they do pricing is the same. So the cloud pricing fundamentals, there's three fundamental drivers of cloud costs, basically. You have compute, storage, and outbound data transfer. The cloud service providers are very nice in that they let you move all of your data up into the cloud for free. Hey, Charlie, I think you have your task manager up. They let you move all of your data up into the cloud for free, but when you want to move it around within the cloud or you want to take it out, that's when they charge you. And that's probably the most variable cost and probably the most confusing piece of the cost triangle, as it were. So as we said below, in most cases, there's no charge for inbound data transfer. Data transfer within the same service and within the same region is usually free. When you go from one service to another, there can be costs that are applied to that, and I have a cool slide about that a little later on. But the core fundamentals of the cloud is you pay for what you use. If you're not using it, you're not paying for it. So if you have a server in the cloud and you turn it off, you're not paying for the server. Any storage attached to it, you would still be paying for because you're still using it. If you want to reserve an instance, meaning you promise AWS or Azure or Google that you're going to continue to use a server of this size for 1 year or 3 years, you can get significant discounts. And obviously, as with most things, the more you pay, the more you use it, the less you pay because you have more negotiating power for a better pricing. And you pay less as the provider costs go down. Cloud is probably one of the few areas where costs tend to go down. There's a lot of competition in the business, and also there's a lot of efficiencies of scale that the cloud providers reach, and they tend to pass those savings on to you. They might not be significant, but if you have a lot of stuff, it really could be. So this was the promised data transfer slide. Again, this is for AWS, but it does work similarly in the other cloud providers. This is just not that I'm going to go over how much all of this costs, but to show the complexity of why it's so hard to figure out how much your total cost is going to be. It's easy to say a server is going to cost X amount of dollars a month. This much storage is going to cost X amount of dollars per month. It's a lot harder to calculate, well, here's where my bandwidth utilization is, and here's how much I'm going to pay for that. And depending upon your use case, this could actually become a significant portion of your bill. And there's, again, it's kind of, it's very difficult to kind of nail it down for a full budgetary view. Before you consider moving to the cloud, you're going to want to do a total cost of ownership analysis. The cloud is not always cheaper. Matter of fact, a lot of times it's not cheaper. So you have to figure out what are you trying to accomplish. A good example in my organization, we're actually a cloud-only company because we're a relatively new startup. But for us, we optimize based on time to market. So we can really move very quickly in the cloud, and actual cost in dollars is a little bit further down the list for us. So you kind of have to see what you're optimizing against. But total cost of ownership is a financial estimate to help identify and direct the indirect costs of a system. So you're going to use this to compare the costs of an entire infrastructure. How much does it cost on-prem? That's going to include your HVAC, your power, all that stuff. And in the cloud, it's going to include all the costs that are associated with that, licensing, hourly costs, networking, stuff like that. And then you can build a case, and you can make both a budgetary and a business decision on how to move forward. Traditional on-prem versus cloud, it's not an apples to apples comparison. So you kind of have to do a little bit of explaining when you go to the finance guys as to how the costs are laid out. When you're dealing with traditional infrastructure, you're amortizing your assets over a certain period of time. You have costs like power, et cetera, and you have fixed costs like real estate. How much is it costing you to house that equipment either in your data center or in a colo facility? The costs for public cloud are a little bit less, I guess I don't want to say complex, but there's less things to measure in the public cloud. It can definitely be just as challenging though to get a real budgetary number. But I think it's really important. Some things that you can't really quantify, like improved time to market and agility. I don't know how you can quantify that from a monetary point of view, which is why you kind of have to figure out what's important to you as you're deciding what to move to the cloud and what not to move to the cloud. And these are just some of the total cost of ownership considerations. You have your server costs. So if you're on-prem, you're going to care about servers, racks, chassis, software, and OS licensing. Storage costs, you need to buy your SAN. You need to have a storage admin. Your network costs, you have network hardware, switches, routers, etc. You have a network admin. You also have the facilities to support all of this. And then on top of that, you have a server admin. Generally in the cloud, you're paying a fixed monthly cost for the server and the operating system. Any software that you're putting on top of it, like if you have a Tableau server or something like that, you're going to pay a licensing fee for that on top. So that works pretty much the same, but you're not paying for individual pieces of hardware. This is all included in the monthly cost for a server. Same goes for the storage. You're paying a flat fee per gigabyte for storage. You probably don't need a SAN admin at that point, unless, of course, you're still running a SAN on-prem, but you wouldn't need to account for his time managing cloud storage because it doesn't work like that. Same thing on the network side. Usually the network can be handled by a system administrator in the cloud. It's not super complex. You can make it very complex especially if you have a very large on-prem environment and a very large cloud environment. Then you might have like BGP routing between the centers, and so then you would have to account for that. And of course, you need a server admin, and in the cloud, very often has that cool marketing term like DevOps or something like that. But it's basically a server admin who knows some basic networking and can do a little bit of scripting and stuff like that. And then you want to be able to optimize in the cloud, but you have to determine what you want to optimize against. Are you optimizing for cost? If all you're optimizing for is cost, unless you have a relatively small environment, you're probably not going to save much money. And to be honest, a lot of times it might be a little bit more expensive. And depending upon how complex your environment is, it could be a lot more expensive. Performance. One of the big advantages of the cloud is that when you buy, I'll give you a good example. When you buy a server for on-prem, you're thinking, I need to buy a server that's going to be big enough to last me for 3 years or however long you amortize against it. So you buy this big honking server, and for the first 2 years, you're using maybe 20% of the server. In the cloud, you're going to build out so that you're using 90%. The goal is to be between 80 and 90% of utilization on anything you build, because if I need to add more compute, it takes me 5 minutes. So I just add more compute, and you pay for what you use. So you want to be as close to that line as you can get. Response time, obviously to build stuff in the cloud is significantly faster. I don't need to wait for Dell to ship me a server. I don't need to then rack it. I don't need to cable it up. I literally push a button and 3 minutes later I have a server. And that would affect your time to market. High availability, if you're a smaller organization, but you need high availability and you have like a single office, the cloud can really benefit you here because you can pick multiple regions. So I can put one part of my infrastructure on the East Coast, one part on the West Coast. If I have a significant number of customers, let's say in the UK, I could put servers in the UK. And the cost for all these different regions is similar. Some regions tend to be more expensive if you're trying to do infrastructure like in Africa or parts of the Far East. It can be a little bit more expensive. Scalability, this also goes to, I guess, performance as well, where you're going to build to suit. I'll give you a good example. In our previous life, CVS Caremark was a customer of mine. And they are the people that do the prescription, mail order prescriptions. And during when everybody, right after open enrollment, when everybody gets their new benefits, from January till March, they needed a system that was humongous in order to be able to handle the load. But the rest of the year, they needed a tiny system because it was just, kind of go as you go. And they were able to save over $1 million a year by moving that system into the cloud, because they could scale it up to be huge for 3 months and then scale it back down to be tiny for the rest of the year. It's kind of a unique use case. Most people don't have that. But if you do have that kind of business, it's very seasonal. This could be a real money saver for you, and also give you less equipment to actually have to manage. Security, that's kind of a little, I guess, kind of hit and miss. A lot of people say, oh, it's more secure to be on-prem or it's more secure to be in the cloud. I think it depends upon your strategy. I think the cloud can be made more secure. I think on-prem can be made more secure. Depends upon how much you're willing to spend and devote to security. Really where the cloud, the only place the cloud inherently is more secure is in its physical building. If you have a data center in your building, you probably have a security guard that's, sleeping at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you have a lock on your door, or they can come through a window. If you're in AWS, they have armed guards and, razor wire fencing and all that stuff. So the physical security of it is going to be better. I don't necessarily know that that's a point that you're going to, that's probably not a hill you want to die on. Manageability, again, I think this is one of those things that kind of depends upon your point of view, which is more manageable. On-prem is nice because you can physically walk into your data center and do whatever needs to be done. It's relatively quick. In the cloud, obviously you can build and destroy stuff quickly. I can tell you from experience, if you have an issue with something and you need to deal with their support, that can be a pretty long haul, hair-pulling effort. But one of the things that the cloud kind of forces you to do to take advantage of its scalability and performance and cost is you building out an infrastructure as code environment. So you can literally deploy an entire environment with a push of a button in a matter of minutes. So it does make that piece of it more manageable, but there's definitely some work that needs to be put into that. And for cost optimization, I found this on a Cloud Health presentation. I kind of stole it. Cloud Health is one of the is a company that provides a system to help you get better cost control on your system. There's a bunch of them. There's Cloud Health, Cloud Checker, and a whole bunch. They're all pretty good, and I would definitely recommend you get a system like this, or even better, get a system like this and get a company behind it as well to also help you do the cloud cost stuff. Because just in AWS, there are, and this is from 2017, so it's probably like 5 times this number now, but there are 1.7 million pricing combinations you can make between operating system types, availability zones, different purchasing options, storage options. So there is anybody who tells you that they are a cloud cost expert is probably lying to you. There's definitely a lot of magic that goes into it. And a lot of science as well, but you definitely are going to want tools to help you, and people who dedicate their lives to cloud costs. The savings can be substantial with not a significant investment. So this is, I did a presentation similar to this a couple of years ago, and this is a real life picture of my CFO every month when he gets the cloud bill. So I wanted to put together the last couple of slides is kind of like some questions to ask as you consider moving to the cloud and you're going to be trying to optimize. You definitely it's important on-prem to have visibility into your infrastructure. It's even more important in the cloud because beyond knowing what's up and down, you need to know what you're using so that you can right size everything, and also so that you can control your costs, so that you can make sure some guy in engineering didn't spin up 500 instances of a server that costs $1,000 a month. So you really want to know how much you're consuming and have that down to a short period of time. The cloud providers allow you to create alerts based on cost when you exceed certain thresholds. The tools that are available allow you to create even more granular alerts, and also can put on guardrails to prevent people from doing things that will bankrupt your company. You also want to make sure that the key business stakeholders are involved, because a lot of times, as I said, it's not about cost, it's about time to market or performance. So you need to have an understanding as to what their needs are and how important they are to the organization as put against cost. And just some areas of to improve TCO when you're in the cloud. You want to make sure you have no or very few idle or unused assets. If you build a server in the cloud and then all of a sudden you're not using it anymore, you can't just leave it sitting in the rack idling. It's not just burning power, it's burning a lot of money. So you need to make sure that any assets that aren't being used are either shut down or destroyed. You also want to make sure you don't oversize or over provision. That's when people move from on-prem into the cloud, that's a common mistake they make. They'll pick up a server and lift and shift it into the cloud, and the server is humongous and the application they're using is tiny, and they're paying for all this compute power that they're totally not using. And if they ever did need it, again, 5 minutes and it's deployed with more compute power. And here it says AWS cost optimization, but Azure and Google and all of the other cloud providers have a lot of cost optimization capabilities.
Let me know how you make out the
Primarily through reservations. There's other systems out there like spot instances where you can buy spare capacity from the cloud providers. That's a little bit more unpredictable, but there are ways to save significant amounts of money. And then you have your key areas of governance. Obviously, when you go to the cloud, you want to have good governance, especially since the cost can be so variable. And if you are like a public company or a company that has compliance requirements, this is going to be important as well. You're going to want to set up cost and financial policies. Is my spend going to exceed my budget? You need to have configuration policies. That's especially important in the cloud. There's a concept of tagging in the cloud where you can tag all your resources. You can put cost centers into it. You can create rules like back this up, don't back that up based on tags. Tagging is a critical piece when you move to the cloud. But in addition, just your overall configuration. How is your security configured? Is it repeatable? And again, that's why a lot of people go to infrastructure as code when they go to the cloud. So that way it's maintained as a code base and it's repeatable. They'll use tools like Terraform and there's a bunch of others out there. Security policy, you want to make sure your security policy in the cloud matches your security policy on-prem, but you have to have the understanding that the attack surface in the cloud is different than on-prem. So the way you secure it is different, but the policies should be the same. People who have access to X data on-prem should have access to the same thing in the cloud and nothing more. So it's really important that you keep your security tight. You don't want your cloud to become a backdoor for on-prem, and vice versa. You don't want on-prem to become a backdoor for the cloud. And operational management policies. Again, this comes to automation. Everything in the cloud benefits from automation. Cost, performance, everything. Anything that's repeatable, you want to automate because then you don't have the human error. You're going to be doing a lot more fiddling with things in the cloud since you're right-sizing everything. So you definitely want to make sure that whatever can be automated to take the human button pushing out of it, the better off it's going to be. I believe that's the last slide. It won't go to my next slide. Hey, Charlie, can you move it to the, do you have any questions?
Let me see. There you go.
Lost control there.
All right, awesome stuff, guys. And you know, it's very interesting because it's a lot of stuff that we talk about with our clients, and I'm sure you guys talk, you know, other people talk about it too. A lot of the reservations, especially in the smaller businesses, is that they don't have the capacity necessarily to, because the cloud, in order to really take advantage of it, is this kind of area where you can, you know, buy a small capacity when it's needed, expand it, and then kind of bring it back when you don't need it anymore. And you made some mention of this, but what we found is a lot of clients, they expand and then they don't contract, or they don't know how to expand and contract, and they don't have the wherewithal to use something like AWS or Azure in a way that really maximizes the cost. So they go back to a more traditional model where it's just give me a server, I pay X number of bucks, whether it's in the cloud. It's not so. Are there ways that you know, that like smaller businesses take advantage of this? And I know some people, and I've seen it happen a little bit, they've expanded, or somebody in their office has expanded, and all of a sudden they're paying and they don't even know they're going to, and they get a bill for $3,000 more than they were expecting to get because somebody expanded it or a service was kind of automatically set up. Are there ways to kind of stop that from happening, or is it still better for a small business to just kind of buy the right size server that they need and pay that regularly as opposed to the fluctuating cost?
I think it depends upon their appetite for risk. But a smaller business could really benefit from partnering with an MSP around that. And then an MSP can use a tool like Cloud Health or Cloud Checker or one of 500 other tools that are actually very good at doing this. And those tools can actually build the guardrails to say, I don't want to spend more than X amount per month. And once you get to that point where your bill is going to be X amount, it just won't let you build more stuff. It can set, or you can set up alarms for thresholds so that people understand, and you can see based on user accounts who's building what, and you know how it's being utilized. It's really, a lot of it is in the tooling. You're not going to be able to. Visibility in the cloud is not as good as, inherently as good as on-prem. You know, I can't look at Task Manager and say, oh, my entire cloud environment is running at 90%. It's a lot more, it takes a lot more work to get to that point. So using good tools and having a good partner to help you is really the key. Either that or hire the people on-prem, but they tend to not be cheap.
Yeah, I think there was a chat question too. So let me pull that up and see what it was. Just switching over to chat right now. Show conversation. So it says, so from Antoinette asked, can you talk about who's responsible for like keeping the firmware and the software and this stuff up? So if you obviously if you have your own Windows server and you just set up a Windows server in the cloud, you're responsible for making sure it's patched and has antivirus and that kind of stuff. But if you're going to these more untraditional models where you have other types of software or you're using things like Docker and like who's responsible, like, and how do you keep up on that to make sure that whoever you're using as a cloud provider is, I mean, we assume Microsoft and AWS are doing the right thing. And then, what I think to add to that question is, if they're kind of not doing the right thing, what's the recourse that you have to communicate with Microsoft or AWS that, the services aren't functioning properly?
All the cloud providers, they use a system called shared responsibility for security. So they lay out pretty clearly, they're pretty good about this, about where their line kind of starts and stops. So they're responsible for all the physical security, obviously. They're responsible to secure the SAN, the actual network, and all the hardware that runs it. They're responsible for all that. In infrastructure as a service environment where you're getting a server and you're paying by the hour, then you as the customer is responsible for patching the operating system. You're responsible for securing it. You're responsible for having a firewall in front of it to protect it. They are not responsible for that. I can only think of one occurrence where, and this is going back many years, where AWS forced people to do an upgrade because the exploit was so catastrophic to their internal systems. But other than that, it's up to you. If your system gets destroyed, it's kind of on you at that point. But if you go to like a platform as a service, like for example, in AWS, I use EKS, which is their managed Kubernetes. So in that case, they're responsible for the Kubernetes backend pieces, and I'm responsible for all the containers that run within the environment for securing it. Do I necessarily trust them 100%? No, I take that into account as we secure. We try to ensure that even the pieces that we're not responsible for are not going to have issues. If you do think that they're not holding up their end of the bargain, you can open a support ticket with them, and your mileage may vary there. Most of the cloud providers, though, do have like a best practices type document. Like AWS has a well-architected framework, which is like 1,000 pages of how to design, secure and design pretty much any service that they offer. I know Microsoft has something similar. I'm sure Google does as well. And if you stick within those guidelines and the kind of the principles of that, you should be able to build a very secure environment. But it's not easier per se to secure something in the cloud than on-prem, other than the actual physical pieces of infrastructure that you no longer have to touch.
So does anybody else have any questions? All right, I'll take that as a no.
So yeah, this is Akhilesh. I have a question. Joe, what is the interplay between the different applications that we have, MRP software, let us say Job Boss, Job Boss Cloud? What is that interplay versus the AWS, for our infrastructure? How does that work?
So you want to connect something that's in one provider to another provider?
Exactly. So we have accounting, they have a cloud solution, MRP cloud solution. And then on top of that, overlay that with a base, AWS instance, if you will. How does that work? Or is it a hybrid model?
It really, at that point, it kind of becomes a hybrid type model. You would have to get some sort of connectivity between AWS and the other provider, whether you're pulling that data via like a webhook or something like, or they give you some sort of API to be able to pull the data. Like if you're using Salesforce or something, and then you're pulling that into, let's say, a data lake or something in AWS, there's usually hooks in there so that they can talk to each other. Most of the providers, especially AWS and Azure, have a lot of services that allow you to pull data from other services and then kind of manipulate it and then put it into a huge data lake for you to do manipulation of. But unfortunately, there's no standard way of doing it. So you kind of have to work with the provider you have and tell them, hey, I want to get this data into this service. How do I do it? And any cloud provided service today should have that built in, because that's a really common request.
Great. Awesome stuff, guys. So I really appreciate it. I think the interesting thing for us is what we're seeing for our clients is that a lot of them are kind of they're doing this hybrid model. They're putting some stuff in the cloud, but mostly they're looking at going over to this more of the software as a service model, where they get most of their complete package that runs their business, and they don't have any servers at all, right? They don't have anything but something that Office 365 gives you all, you don't have Exchange server anymore, you have Office 365, and that gives you don't know where that server is, you don't know anything about it, or QuickBooks in the cloud, or Salesforce. How prevalent, and when do you see that that's a model that, some businesses will say that it's just about the business line application, and I don't really give a crap about any infrastructure anymore. I buy this business line application to do my business. I buy this business line application to do my business. And kind of as long as I can get them to communicate, then even this cloud thing is kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a path down the road. I mean, I work for a startup, so we actually do that. We don't have a physical office. Everybody is remote, so we have no place to actually put servers. So we happen to use Google, we use Asana, everything is as a service. I think they use QuickBooks as a service for accounting. Everything is as a service. We're going to market with a tech service, so we host that in AWS. But yeah, if you're a manufacturing company and you might not need to have any non-SaaS type stuff. You may be able to buy it all as a service. Even the tools that you're using today, the company that makes the software that runs your production lines might be as a service now.
So when you get into that model, then we're talking less about, like, we kind of have this more maybe predictable cost, because you pay X number of users, X number of nodes, that kind of stuff, sometimes based off a transaction. If you're using some of these maybe real estate applications, they charge you on things like that. So you have this more kind of traditional, that cost calculator is very different. But so I guess the question is do you think that that's the way? For me, I think that's the way most people are going to wind up going. The problem that you run with that is that you get very sticky when you run into that model. It becomes very hard to move between some of these applications, and you kind of become beholden to them. But then most of those companies are actually running, like you guys are going to do, on top of AWS or Azure or something else similar.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. You do get stuck into a vendor lock-in situation, which is definitely a risk. And you also have to look at the reliability. You have to be sure that you have reliable internet, for example. If you're in a place that doesn't have reliable internet, this is probably going to be a non-starter for you. And it changes your whole kind of disaster recovery type thing. What if the vendor goes out of business? What if the vendor gets hit with some sort of ransomware attack? What's there? You need to do a lot more vendor due diligence. Are they SOC 2 compliant? What's their security strategy? Stuff like that to ensure that you're actually going to be up and running.
And then obviously, so when you're doing that cost calculator again, now you're saying to yourself, and I think a lot of people in the cloud think, if I put it in the cloud, in some cases, there's people like you had mentioned in the cloud that think if it's in the cloud, it's inherently insecure. But there's a lot of people that think if it's in the cloud, well, Microsoft's got my back, right? Microsoft, we know for a fact, I've had this happen to us, that Microsoft doesn't back up your SharePoint databases, right? They give you 5 or 6 days and then they say, well, you guys lost it, right? So now you think you're saving money using, let's say you think you're saving money using Office 365, but that Office 365 isn't really, unless you pay for the archiving services on top of it, unless you pay for maybe even some other kind of spam filtering that they use or some other kind of, filtering. Now those costs start adding up again, to secure these applications that are in the cloud.
Absolutely, 100%. You need to take that all into account and don't necessarily trust your cloud provider. If they say they're going to do X, you want to make sure they're doing X, and if it's something that's really critical to you, make sure that you're doing it as well.
Trust but verify.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Trust but verify. They're very large organizations that take a very homogenous look at things. You as an organization have very specific needs, especially if you're in an industry that requires compliance. You want to make sure that you have all of your I's dotted and T's crossed, and that you're comfortable with the solution. Don't rely on the cloud provider. I think the amount of effort and time and money that you put into securing on-prem, you should put at least that in the cloud as well.
So is there a general consensus? Obviously, we saw that Azure and AWS are kind of the bears in the market. Is there a general consensus as to why somebody would choose one over the other, or even I know in some cases we talk about from a cost standpoint, especially if you're a smaller business, it's probably better off to go with neither of those two and go with a more traditional hosting company because they tend to be a little less expensive once you add everything up. But is there a reason why one person would pick? Is there a cost difference between Azure and AWS that people should know about, or Google? I mean,
they're all similarly priced depending upon which services you use with them. If you're a Microsoft shop and you have like an enterprise license or whatever their volume licensing is now, Azure is going to be the way you want to go. It's the licensing carries forward better for Windows and other applications into Azure. You'll save more money in licensing by going that way. Other than that, I think it's really a lot of it comes down to preference. Google and AWS operate very similarly. If you can work on one, you can work on the other. Azure is pretty different than the two of them. And I don't mean that in a good or a bad way. It's just different. So I guess whatever skills people you have, that's kind of the direction you want to go.
So when you talk about the skills, are there people in these different platforms that, are there more people at a better rate that know AWS? So like if you have to pay a professional, or if the professional charges the same kind of like, if, across different businesses. So if I had to hire an engineer that knew AWS versus an engineer that knows Azure versus an engineer that knows Google, are they all kind of similarly costed to the business?
What I've found is that the AWS and the Azure folks are pretty similarly priced out. Google, I found for whatever reason, the engineers tend to be a little bit more money. That could be because Google's very big in the financial industry. So a lot of hedge funds use Google. A lot of people with a lot of money to just throw around use Google. So that might be part of the reason why. But I think you're not going to have any shortage of people that know either AWS or Azure, and they're going to be similarly priced. And if you have an Azure guy, let's say you're an Azure company and you have an Azure guy and you decide, I'm going to start putting resources in AWS, it would take an Azure guy a couple of weeks to get to a pretty good level of mastery of AWS, and vice versa. The concepts are the same, just what they call it and how they kind of go about it, and their philosophy of how they build their clouds is a little bit different. But neither is a bad choice. If somebody came to me and said, I'm going to go Azure, I personally prefer AWS, but I would never try to convince somebody not to go Azure because it's going to get them to the exact same place.
Great. Awesome stuff.
So, one point about licensing, just to double back to that. Azure, we found tends to bundle some of the Microsoft costs, like connection licenses, the Windows licenses, things like that, in the cost of subscription. So you sort of have it there in front of you. The remote desktop licenses, they're per user, so they're also easy to figure into the equation. So that's right from the get-go, without an enterprise license. You're buying a VM or you're buying a SQL, a SQL Azure server. There's no cows for that. You just buy it and connect as many as its performance will allow it to. So that may also sometimes be a determining factor. I agree with you. We're primarily an Azure shop, but we're also an AWS shop, and I would agree with you that the transition back and forth is pretty easy. No one is the right choice. Either one of them is a good choice, for certain.
Yeah, AWS definitely is more Linux friendly. I don't do any Windows, so I don't come across it, but I also don't see a whole lot of Windows stuff as I look at my AWS console. So
yeah, we've successfully set up some Linux servers in Azure as well. So I think Microsoft recently kind of figured out they've got to either play in that arena or they're going to lose a big market share. So they have, in the past couple of years, opened that up to being more friendly to LAMP stacks and MongoDB databases and things like that.
All right. So if there's no other questions, then we'll wrap this up. I really appreciate the work that you guys did and allowing us to, talk about what kind of, just even giving us an idea of what kind of, costs we could expect or save or not save in the cloud. Obviously, from our standpoint, generally what we see is that, if you're going to get a lot of cost savings in the cloud, it usually takes, in the cloud, in an Azure and AWS environment, it takes somebody kind of focusing on making sure everything's kind of tweaked right and that kind of stuff, as opposed to a more traditional cloud model, which is just I take my servers physically and put them somewhere else physically, but it's somebody else's data center and I just pay a monthly cost for that. You might be able to save some money there, but obviously there's, as you scale up, then the cost usually at some point kind of flip. When you get real big, it doesn't make sense to do it that way anymore. So we appreciate all that stuff. I think, Andrea, can you tell us what the next thing we have on the schedule is, or are we scheduled? So our next meeting will be, in a month from now. Can you, do we have a scheduled meeting for next month yet?
Yeah, so it's going to be Wednesday, December 1st, same time, 8:30. I think we're still deciding whether we're going to do a joint thing or what, but stay tuned because it'll be on December 1st.
Yeah, so we should be looking at, I think, a joint meeting, hopefully with the business development crew. We'll give you guys some more information on that. If you want any more information about our group, or just definitely shoot us a line, let us know, and we'll share out this presentation. So with the HIA, and they'll send it out. So I really appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for the effort, Joe and Charlie. It was really interesting. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris, and everybody.
thanks.
Thanks,
All right,
guys. Have a great day.
You too.